We spend so much of our lives preparing for a future that never arrives. We build grand plans for career milestones, for perfect relationships, for the day we finally achieve some measure of stability. And this planning is comforting because it gives us something to focus on, something concrete and visible. But what if all our intricate scaffolding of hope was built around an end point we refuse to acknowledge? What if that unseen curtain hanging behind us was simply too vast, too dark, too unknowable? The fear of death at its core is often the fear of not knowing. It is the terrifying blank space where certainty once resided. We are conditioned from childhood to view endings as failures. We treat separation like a broken machine and loss like a permanent defect in our own design. This cultural bias makes us terrified of ceasing because we have only ever known how to keep going. To stop seems not just difficult, but somehow morally wrong, as if the act of simply existing requires perpetual momentum. So, we learn to outrun contemplation. We build a life so full of activity that our minds have no quiet space left to ponder the silence. The rushing becomes a form of avoidance. It is easier to be worried about tomorrow's budget or today's minor disagreement than it is to confront the magnitude of one's own finitude. The weight of the unknown curtain is immense because the curtain itself represents everything we cannot control. The sudden illness, the unforeseen catastrophe, the quiet passing in sleep. It is the boundary between what is and what will be. And this boundary is where our greatest anxieties gather. We spend so much emotional energy trying to pull back the velvet edges of that curtain, demanding answers from a realm that simply does not have them to give. Think about how many precious moments we have filtered through the lens of potential disaster or missed opportunity. Every choice we make, every word we utter, is often colored by an unspoken thought. What if this doesn't work out? What if I fail at this? What if my loved ones don't understand me? We are living as if our current moment might be immediately followed by collapse. This state of perpetual anxious anticipation robs us of the present gift. We are perpetually suspended between two realities, a life we want to continue and an ending that feels intolerable. Yet, to fear the void is often to mistake the void for something purely negative. The unknown curtain might not be nothingness. Perhaps it is simply difference. It is the profound gap of mystery itself. And mystery, while inherently unsettling, has always been the birthplace of art, philosophy, and breakthrough understanding. By defining death only as an absolute stop, a catastrophic blackout, we limit our understanding. But if we view it instead as a transition, a fundamental shift in state, then the fear changes its shape. It becomes less paralyzing and more like a threshold. The challenge, therefore, is not to eliminate the fear entirely, for that might be impossible or even unnatural, but rather to change our relationship with it. We must learn to live with the uncertainty, recognizing that the discomfort of the unknown is simply the friction created by confronting reality's fundamental mystery. This realization does not banish worry, but it defangs it, transforming a paralyzing dread into a philosophical contemplation. The fear we carry about death is often less about the actual biological ending, and more about what we feel we will lose in that process. We are afraid of losing identity, of losing connection, of losing the self we have so carefully constructed over decades. These losses seem huge, monumental, impossible to bear. But philosophy teaches us a radical reevaluation, that who we are, the core essence of our humanity, is not reliant on physical duration or constant external affirmation. It is rooted in how we engage with life right now. We must cultivate the intellectual courage to accept ambiguity. We must realize that true strength does not come from knowing all the answers, but from remaining steady and grounded when the questions become too vast to hold. The unknown curtain, then, ceases to be a source of terror and instead becomes a monumental reminder of what is possible: transformation. And in accepting the inevitability of transition, of endings leading inevitably to beginnings, we learn to live with an extraordinary depth of appreciation for the simple reality unfolding before us. We treat time as if it were a boundless river, flowing without end. We fill our days with busyness and commitments, believing that sheer activity can keep the silence at bay. Yet, deep beneath the surface of constant motion, there is a profound awareness of limits, a sense of ticking down. The mind resists this concept with everything it possesses. It tells us to plan for tomorrow or even next week, as if those future moments were guaranteed stations on a permanent railway line. This endless projection into what might be, or what should always be, is the truest form of avoidance. The metaphor of time passing, like sand through an hourglass, is so elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its truth. It does not pause for our triumphs or acknowledge our profound anxieties. The grains fall with relentless indifference. We spend our lives frantically rushing to get somewhere, anywhere, simply because standing still, to look at the dwindling pile of sand, demands that we face something difficult: the measurable finiteness of existence itself. The fear is not just of stopping, it is of the cessation of becoming. It is the terror of the unknowable curtain falling and finding ourselves without script, without direction, simply suspended in the mystery. Our culture has built a fortress of distraction against this void. We accumulate goals, possessions, titles, and fleeting distractions, all designed to prove that we matter enough, or are busy enough to warrant continued existence. But these achievements, when viewed closely, feel like elaborate scaffolding built around an empty space. The truth is that most of the time we waste is not spent doing things, but in rehearsing what we should be feeling, how we should be acting, or regretting what was said moments before. We are constantly performing for an audience who may never arrive, and this exhausting performance drains us far more than any actual struggle ever could. To stare into the hourglass sands is to confront a quiet inevitability. It forces a brutal audit of our lives. How much energy do we devote to resisting the end, and how much energy would be better spent embracing what remains? This self-examination can feel unbearably difficult, like standing naked before a mirror reflecting decades of unspoken compromises. We build up relationships, hoping that they will somehow extend our time. Friendships we treat as extensions of ourselves. We cling to routines and habits not because they bring joy or stability, but because deviation from them feels suspiciously like falling apart. The sheer inertia of habit is often mistaken for comfort, when in reality it is just the sedative we use to quiet the insistent whisper of mortality. The wise traditions teach that resistance only generates suffering. If death is an inevitable point on the timeline, constantly fighting its approach is exhausting itself and our spirit. It is like battling a strong current in a wide river. You can expend all your strength trying to swim against it, but true peace comes from learning to navigate with the flow, understanding where the current takes you while still charting your own internal course. Therefore, we must practice stillness, not the empty stillness of nothingness, but the deep, meditative pause that allows us to hear what the soul has been trying to tell us beneath the clamor of modern life. When the sands slow their fall, we are suddenly faced with a terrifying freedom. We have nothing left to pretend about, and everything left to truly live. This confrontation with our own fragility is not meant to induce panic. It is intended as a profound invitation. An invitation to finally stop rushing toward an uncertain future, and instead anchor ourselves firmly in the radiant mystery of the present moment. We have spent so long in the rush, a ceaseless motion, a desperate effort to fill every second, to occupy all available time. We build lives upon achievements, stacked moments of supposed importance, hoping that sheer activity will somehow stave off the looming question: what happens when we stop? Time, it seems, has taught us one dangerous illusion: that if we are busy enough, nothing difficult will ever arrive. We treat life like a race against an invisible finish line, sprinting toward a certainty that is only defined by its lack of end. But the destination is rarely the thing we should fear. The real terror lies in the journey's constant distraction from what truly matters: the quiet, immediate presence of connection. Look at our memories. They are littered with unsaid words, with compliments swallowed back for fear of sounding too earnest, with apologies never given because confronting a past hurt feels too monumental a task. We carry these unspoken goodbyes like small, heavy stones in the pocket of our heart. Each silence is a weighted loss, compounding until they form a deep ache. The tragedy of human connection is that we are often masters of procrastination, applying that same delaying tactic to the deepest emotional reckoning. We say we will talk about it later, tomorrow, when things settle down, next week, after this stress passes, but later arrives and becomes another day absorbed by the current flow of trivial tasks. The inevitable truth is that time does not wait for us to feel ready. We build up elaborate emotional barricades around our truest feelings. We mistake emotional inertia for stability. We believe if we do not speak a hard truth or express an overwhelming love, then perhaps by withholding it, we can somehow preserve its perfection. But what is preserved, in fact, is only the polished emptiness of potential. Imagine the faces you see now, etched into the passing moments. Friends who are growing older, whose paths begin to diverge. Family members whose lives operate on timelines far from your own immediate comfort zone. You find yourself nodding along during conversations, smiling convincingly at milestones you know will someday end. You do not speak of the weight of these bonds. You do not articulate how much their presence grounds you against the universal drift. The effort to keep everything perfect, untouched by time or friction, is exhausting and futile. It forces us into a state of perpetual guard duty over our own emotional lives. We treat genuine intimacy as something fragile, something that might shatter if exposed too brightly, too quickly. So we wrap it in caution. We layer conversation with polite anecdotes, deflecting the profound stillness where true connection must reside. The Stoics understood this dynamic profoundly. They taught us that virtue is not a solitary inner achievement, but an active expression toward others. It is demonstrated in the care given, the truth spoken when it is difficult, and the farewell offered without reservation. The courage required to truly say goodbye, or even simply to fully say hello, is far greater than we are often willing to muster. We confuse holding on with true connection. Holding on suggests resistance, a physical attempt to keep something in its current state. But life, like a river, is defined by movement and transition. To grasp too tightly is only to invite the sting of eventual release. The wisdom that must settle over us is this: do not wait for an occasion grand enough to seal your affections. Do not wait until the last sunset or the gathering storm of illness. Build moments into one another now. The echo we hear today is the sound of those unsaid goodbyes reverberating through all our current interactions. It reminds us that many of the most vital messages, the affirmations, the deep expressions of belonging, the simple acknowledgement of a life shared, remain trapped inside us, waiting for permission to escape. They wait for some mythical moment when we will feel perfectly ready. But perfect readiness is itself an illusion, one manufactured by fear. The cost of silence is measured in regret. It is the weight of if only spoken to oneself in the quiet hours before sleep arrives. The realization dawns with painful clarity that while we spend our days worried about grand cosmic unknowns, the void, the great unknown curtain, we often fail to manage the small, simple uncertainties right around us. The chance to mend a relationship is never fully closed until the last breath has been drawn. And because life's clock moves relentlessly, procrastination in love and empathy carries consequences heavier than any imagined end. We must practice speaking into the silence. We must learn the muscle memory of vulnerability, the willingness to open up our histories, share our weaknesses, and acknowledge the deep dependency we have on other imperfect souls. To truly live is not merely to breathe through another year. It is to ensure that those who mean the most to you know precisely how much they matter. It means replacing "we'll talk about it sometime" with a sincere declaration, no matter how small or inconvenient that conversation might feel right in this moment. Because sometimes, the truest preparation for what comes after death, or even just surviving an ordinary Tuesday, is clearing the emotional slate by finally saying goodbye to the things we held back today. We have spent so much of our lives attempting to control the perimeter of our existence. We build walls around our certainties, creating comfortable little bubbles where time seems linear and predictable. But life, by its very nature, is a force that resists being contained. It flows like the river that bends and shifts course regardless of our strongest dams or highest barriers. We remember the rush to fill every moment, the need to keep moving forward simply because pausing feels too much like standing at the edge of a void. Yet, true stillness, the profound kind, is not an absence of motion, but rather an alignment with what is already happening. It is finding the natural rhythm beneath the surface frantic energy. If we cannot change the tide or mend the season that has passed, our instinct is often to fight it. We generate immense emotional and mental resistance against reality itself. This struggle creates a deep suffering. We cling to how things were yesterday, lamenting what could have been different last month, and fearing every possibility of tomorrow. This perpetual effort to impose our perfect will upon an imperfect world only drains us. The root lesson here is recognizing where our strength is being wasted. It is wasted in resistance. To accept reality, truly accepting what is, does not mean passive surrender or indifference. Quite the opposite. It is a profound and active kind of wisdom, a confrontation with truth. It means understanding the immutable laws of nature, human existence included. Consider the turning of the seasons. The autumn leaf does not struggle against the coming fall. It simply detaches itself when its cycle is complete. That detachment is not defeat. It is perfect timing. This concept challenges our modern craving for permanence. We desire perpetual spring, endless certainty. But life operates in cycles. Growth leads to ripeness, which inevitably gives way to decay and rest. The philosopher teaches us that pain arises when expectation meets limitation, when we expect a fixed state of being and reality insists on transformation. Suffering begins. Stoicism offers us a rigorous framework for this acceptance. It is not simply "oh well." It is disciplined assent. It is asking, what elements are within my sphere of influence right now? These include my judgment, my intention, and my response to events. Everything outside that, the weather, the actions of others, the passage of time itself, or the inevitable end, belongs to a larger natural order, a cosmic flow we cannot personally dictate. Our inner citadel must be built not against imagined assaults from the future, but for resilience in the face of present reality. When we stop fighting what is, an extraordinary energy returns to us. That energy was previously consumed by worry and regret. It becomes available for genuine living. This acceptance fundamentally alters our understanding of loss. If loss is merely a transition, if change is recognized not as a breakage, but as a continuous process, then the finality we associate with death begins to soften. We stop viewing endings as catastrophic voids and start seeing them as necessary points in a grand pattern. But acceptance also demands great courage. It requires us to look at things plainly, without the softening filter of hope or denial. It means acknowledging that some truths are simply uncomfortable, that sometimes love cannot prevent loss, that sometimes suffering is inherent to existence, and that our biggest anxieties often stem from stories we tell ourselves about what might happen. The journey into acceptance is not a single epiphany. It is the daily practice of relearning, where we draw the line between what belongs to us and what does not. It is recognizing that, while we cannot command tomorrow to be different, we can radically choose how to inhabit this breath, right now. Realizing that the ground beneath our feet today was once the highest peak yesterday helps anchor us firmly in the immediate moment. It teaches us to trust the cycle, trusting that everything must eventually return to source to begin anew. We have spent so long examining the vastness of time. We have learned to distinguish what we can change from what simply must pass. We grasped that much of our daily suffering comes not from the inevitable passing, but from our fierce, futile resistance to it. This required us first to acknowledge the boundaries, the limit of our years, the end of breath, and the mystery that waits beyond. But knowing these limits merely defines a perimeter. It does not teach us how to live within it with grace. The true work, the vital core of this journey, is moving inward. We must shift our focus from the unstoppable river of time flowing outside us to the landscape of our own minds and spirits. This is where we find the inner citadel. The mind, in ancient terms, was not merely a processing organ for thought. It was the ultimate sanctuary. It was the single domain that remained entirely within our grasp, a fort built with judgment, choice, and deliberate reaction. Nothing external could storm its walls without permission from us. We cannot command time to halt its flow, nor can we mandate that fate withhold its blows. These are truths we must accept, like the relentless turning of the seasonal wheel. But what we absolutely control is the lens through which we observe these unchangeable facts. The world may bombard us with fear of loss, fear of failing, fear of the unknown void that awaits our departure. This fear attempts to convince us that external threats are more dangerous than internal disorder. It suggests that if we merely adjust our circumstances, or accumulate enough possessions, or achieve sufficient status, then safety will finally arrive. Yet history and philosophy teach us a profound contradiction. True security is never found in accumulation. It is found in sovereignty. Sovereignty over self means recognizing the difference between being troubled by an event and being controlled by one's judgment of that event. The external event, a sudden illness, a devastating loss, the simple fact of aging, is neutral. It simply happens. But our internal response, the narrative we weave around it, that is the source of suffering. Fear, therefore, is not a warning signal to be feared itself. Rather, it is merely an overeducated habit of the mind, a persistent tendency to anticipate disaster and assign ultimate power to things beyond our will. To control this inner citadel is thus not to eliminate feeling, but to stabilize the emotional ground beneath it. Imagine the self as a structure under siege. The walls are built of rational principles, stoic virtue, disciplined reflection, and deep empathy. The attackers are circumstance and unchecked emotion. When fear strikes, a wave of pure anxiety about what lies ahead or what has been lost. The instinct is to panic, to run, or to lash out. But the inner citadel demands a pause. It demands a deliberate return to rational assessment. We must ask ourselves, is this terror based on evidence I can verify in this moment? Or is it merely an echoing assumption amplified by my own internal narrative of worst-case scenarios? The practice here is one of constant, gentle defiance against the pull of panic. When we feel that familiar knot tightening in our chest, the physical manifestation of generalized dread about death or uncertainty, we must pause and mentally separate the raw sensation from the meaning we assign to it. We acknowledge, I am feeling intense fear. This is a human reaction to profound existential questioning. But this feeling does not, by itself, mandate action. It simply exists as data. This internal discipline is what separates endurance from collapse. The resilient spirit is not the one who never feels dread. It is the one who can sit within that dreadful space and still reason clearly. It means accepting vulnerability not as a weakness to be hidden, but as the essential condition of human experience, the raw material upon which consciousness works. We are creatures built on contradiction. We crave permanence, yet we are defined by flux. We fear oblivion, yet our very being is marked by transformation. By mastering this internal space, we transform what was once a source of paralytic dread into a field for intellectual and emotional growth. Our peace does not come from avoiding the confrontation with death. It comes from realizing that life, lived fully within principle, is itself already structured with enough meaning to absorb its own ending. We are preparing ourselves, moment by moment, not just for the final curtain call, but for the deep, meaningful moments of passing through life itself. This inner fortress allows us to greet whatever comes, the joy, the sorrow, the quiet acceptance of inevitable change, with a measured dignity. It is the ultimate act of self-respect, realizing that even when everything external slips away, the greatest power we retain belongs solely to our own reasoned choice. We have spent time considering the great mysteries of existence. We have looked at the unstoppable march of time and confronted our own limits. And we have begun to strengthen the inner walls, understanding that while we cannot control what happens outside us, we can master the landscape of our own minds. But perhaps the most persistent source of discomfort is not the passing moment itself, but the very nature of the fear that clings to us. We often treat fear as a rational response, a signal warning us of danger. But what if we examine the root premise? What if fear is not always logical? For too long, we have accepted dread as an inevitable guide, mistaking imagination for undeniable reality. It is time to approach this feeling with the sharp scrutiny of pure logic. Our biggest fears rarely spring from immediate threat. They germinate in the fertile soil of what might be. We spend our mental energy building elaborate castles out of what if. What if we fail? What if they leave us? What if everything we value simply vanishes without a sound? These scenarios are terrifying because they offer no definitive answer, only limitless potential for catastrophe. The mind, in its effort to protect us, sometimes leaps to the worst possible conclusion. It operates under a faulty assumption that pain must be proportional to our current comfort. This mental architecture built on pure speculation is what I call a logical trap. We are so adept at telling narratives about ourselves and our futures that we forget that these stories may not align with the reality of cause and effect. Emotion, powerful as it is deeply unreliable when used as an oracle. It can make us feel profoundly unsafe simply by predicting suffering long before any danger exists. The emotional impulse tells us to run from what we do not understand, to move away from the silence, away from the contemplation of endings. We prefer distraction because stillness forces us into a confrontation with our deepest assumptions about life and death. We equate emptiness with loss, rather than recognizing it as pure potential. This confusion creates tremendous suffering. The challenge here is to decouple the feeling of fear from its purported source, to stop treating imaginary possibilities, the colossal disaster that might happen next year, or the irreversible regret from a decade ago, as factual predictions. When we find ourselves gripped by intense anxiety about a future event, I ask you to pause and engage your logic. Where does this specific fear originate? Is it tethered to something verifiable happening today, or is it merely an extrapolation of past anxieties wrapped in a worst-case scenario? The mind can be both our greatest ally and our cruelest deceiver. When we allow emotional narratives to take over, when we let the vivid pictures of disaster dictate our actions and mood, we are essentially surrendering control of our judgment to feeling. And that is where suffering takes root. Think of it like constructing a logical argument. An argument requires premises, evidence, and a conclusion. Fear often gives us strong emotional conclusions without providing any verifiable premises. It presents the disaster as if it were already written in stone, demanding immediate panic or frantic avoidance. Yet, history teaches us that life is messy. Reality seldom operates with such neat, dramatic certainty. The gradual turning of the season does not herald a sudden collapse. True change is often subtle, persistent, and unexpected. To dismantle this trap, we must practice intellectual skepticism toward our own feelings. When dread rises, do not simply accept it as truth. Treat it as a hypothesis that requires testing against reality. Examine it with cool detachment. What evidence supports the magnitude of this fear? If the support is merely "I might feel anxious," then it is an internal state, not an external fact demanding preemptive suffering. This rigorous examination doesn't dismiss the significance of death or uncertainty. Rather, it simply separates manageable reality from overwhelming fiction. It allows us to acknowledge the mystery while keeping our emotional response grounded in rationality. The profound realization that we can question even the most primal instincts, the instinct to flee and panic, is perhaps the greatest freedom a philosophy can offer. The ultimate goal is not to become emotionless machines, living only by logic. That would be an impoverished existence. Instead, it is to cultivate a form of emotional resilience, an internal skepticism that acts as a safeguard for our peace of mind. We want empathy when we see suffering in others, and profound joy when confronted with beauty. But between these two poles, we must build a rational foundation. We learn, therefore, to live not according to the compelling drama of imagined futures, but according to the demonstrable virtues of the present moment. To stand before the curtain of the unknown without collapsing into panic, instead viewing it as simply unseen, a mystery to be accepted rather than a threat to be feared. This careful philosophical process, this daily act of questioning our deepest fears, is the truest form of self-mastery. It is realizing that true power lies not in knowing all answers, but in mastering the question itself. To live fully is to face uncertainty with reasoned composure, recognizing that while life ends and change is guaranteed, the capacity for rational understanding remains ours until the very end. We have journeyed through the profound questions of time and self. We learned that rushing away from endings only makes us miserable in the moment we are supposed to live. We explored acceptance, finding strength not by changing what comes, but by controlling how we respond to it. And we studied the architecture of fear itself, learning to distinguish mere panic from reasoned thought. All these lessons point us toward a singular, unavoidable truth. Our time is limited. It is this very limit that sometimes feels like an agonizing weight, a crushing limitation on potential. We are natural beings who crave permanence, who would rather exist in the comforting illusion of forever than face the stark reality of finitude. Yet, it is perhaps precisely because we know we will end that life gains its vivid color, its sharp meaning, and its essential value. Mortality is not merely an ending. It is a powerful catalyst for living. The ancient wisdom suggests that if existence were infinite, our actions would lose their urgency. Why strive for mastery if tomorrow offers endless chances to learn? Why dedicate ourselves deeply to relationships if time can always be found to mend every rift and say every necessary goodbye? Without the ticking clock, commitment might become casual, and passion might wither into indifference. The utility of mortality lies in its scarcity. It imposes a beautiful urgency upon our lives. Because time slips through our fingers like fine desert dust, we learn to cherish it with profound gratitude. We begin to select our moments not by what is convenient, but by what matters most to the self who stands before the altar of passing years. Consider the depth required for true focus. A lifelong career demands concentration, yes, but even within that field, there are peak moments, the breakthroughs, the crucial decisions, the chance encounters with mentors or peers, that are framed by the knowledge that this chapter will close. The shadow of the end sharpens our attention to the present task. It elevates routine action into meaningful commitment. This principle extends far beyond professional pursuits. Think of love, for instance. When we know time is guaranteed, a gentle affection can become merely habit. But when we recognize its brevity, that shared laughter with a loved one becomes a treasure. Every evening walk carries the weight and glory of limited opportunities. We speak more deeply, we listen more intently, because we understand that moments cannot be repeated endlessly. The scarcity of time demands intentionality in our being. It forces us to prune away the superfluous anxieties, the petty grievances, and the endless cycle of comparison with others. What do we truly value? Is it accumulation of things, or the depth of impact left on a few souls? The knowledge that this life has a final boundary acts as a powerful internal compass, pointing us toward what possesses inherent worth. The connections, the memories, the cultivated virtue. This realization can be both breathtakingly empowering and deeply frightening. On one hand, it is freedom. We are finally liberated from the illusion of endless tomorrow. We are free to act fully. On the other, the weight of that finality demands an immense reckoning with our past self. It asks us, have I lived for something, or simply until something else happened? Has my energy been spent chasing phantoms, or has it built foundations that will endure within my own spirit? The great philosophical challenge presented by mortality is to transform fear into fuel. We must shift our perspective from viewing the end as a terrifying void of nothingness to seeing it as the necessary final step in a greater cycle. It is simply transformation, a return to the raw material that brought us here. This understanding does not allow for despair. Despair assumes that the end means erasure. But true philosophy suggests that what dies within us continues, the wisdom accumulated, the love imparted, the resilience built. These echo outward, defining our utility even after our physical presence fades. We become conduits of influence, rather than simply containers of breath. Thus, we must treat every sunrise not as a guaranteed commodity, but as a precious loan. We are reminded that life is not measured by its duration in years, but by the richness and integrity with which it is lived. The awareness of our finite time does not steal joy. Rather, it acts like a powerful spiritual focusing lens, clarifying what truly shines, what deserves our attention, and where we must finally invest our whole selves. It turns existence from an accident into a magnificent design, compelling us toward the art of the present moment. We have spent chapters examining the great human compulsions, the need to fill every silence, the refusal to say a difficult goodbye, and the fierce battle against anything we cannot control. We learned that resistance is not strength. It is simply wasted energy. From understanding what fate has already written into the cycles of nature, we shifted our focus inward, recognizing that our greatest battlefield resides within the quiet sanctuary of our own minds. But how do we carry this profound acceptance, this realization that much of life must simply unfold into the raw, uncomfortable territory of death itself? To consider mortality is to confront the ultimate unknown, the single boundary against which all human ambition and love are measured. It seems natural that this thought should bring panic, a sudden lurch of fear into the chest. We prepare for careers, for families, for comfort, but rarely do we prepare for the ending. The ancient practices around the world offer us a counter-ritual, memento mori. Literally, it means remembering you must die. And in our modern rush, this phrase sounds less like wisdom and more like a grave warning, a morbid pronouncement designed to paralyze. The philosophy of memento mori suggests something far more profound than mere dread. It is not meant to be an inspiration for misery or self-pity. Instead, it functions as a powerful prompt, an ultimate call to action. It forces us to pause, not out of fear, but out of radical focus. The awareness of our limited time does not diminish life. Paradoxically, it intensifies it. It lends weight and preciousness to every sunrise and every shared meal. Think about the people you love, those connections that sustain you now. Imagine suddenly losing them, not physically, perhaps, but the ease of their presence, the ability to share a simple glance across a crowded room. This thought is not meant to induce sorrow. Rather, it should motivate an immediate engagement with the warmth and light surrounding us. It asks us, if time were only measured by how much we are truly present for others, what would our daily actions look like? The weight of this understanding requires a deliberate shift in focus from simply surviving to actually living. The mistake many people make is interpreting mortality as an endpoint to be feared, but the Stoic view reframes it. Death is not the absolute void. It is merely a transformation, a transition, a necessary curtain drop that allows for new acts of creation. It is part of the cycle itself. The contemplation of death becomes, therefore, an exercise in gratitude and preparedness for life. We stop worrying about the mechanical process of leaving and instead focus on maximizing the quality of our current state. This requires confronting not just physical endings, but emotional ones. The ending of old narratives, the passing of assumptions, the letting go of grudges. This chapter is an act of intellectual defiance against despair. We are told to look at death without blinking, without romanticizing it as a peaceful sleep or dreading it as a violent rupture. Instead, we must view it with clarity, as a natural consequence, a certainty that underpins the entire beautiful structure of our existence. When we truly internalize this ultimate certainty, something remarkable happens to the small, daily anxieties that clutter our minds. The panic over deadlines, the petty resentment over slights, the fear of insufficient success, these things begin to recede. They lose their necessary gravitas because they are utterly inconsequential when measured against the backdrop of the eternal cycle. Our perspective expands immensely. The ancient philosopher Epictetus taught us that we must be concerned with what is truly up to us. Up to us is not merely how we die, but how we choose to live up until that point. It is choosing compassion over judgment, intention over apathy, and radical presence over perpetual distraction. Preparation for mortality is thus defined as achieving a state of profound inner alignment, a peace that does not depend on the continuation of physical life. It means having performed our necessary goodbyes while the people were still able to hear them. It means having faced difficult truths about ourselves, flaws and all. It is the reconciliation with self, accepting the messy incompleteness of the human spirit. To carry this knowledge, to remember that everything must eventually change, is not a burden. It is liberation. It strips away the false idolization of permanence, allowing us to breathe deeply in the sheer reality of what is. We realize that fear itself is often rooted in illusion, the imagined suffering after death, or the fear of being forgotten, which are narratives we spin in darkness rather than confronting truths in the light. The final lesson drawn from this profound reflection is that accepting our inevitable passing frees us to treat time as a gift, measured not by years remaining, but by moments fully lived. We cease to count down the days toward an ending, and instead begin counting up the graces of each single day. This understanding transforms dread into dignified acceptance. It allows us to walk through the world with the quiet confidence that our life is precious, because it has boundaries which give meaning to all the magnificent action that precedes them. We have spent much time looking at the edge of life. We looked at the passage of time, at the weight of what we cannot control. But now, we must ask a more focused question. How do we prepare for that transition? This is not about resignation, nor is it merely dwelling on sadness. True preparation is an active process, a profound act of self-reconciliation. It asks us to reconcile our past selves with the person who stands before death. How can we make peace with what we have lived? And how do we ensure that when the final chapter closes, we are not left with a drawer full of unspoken what-ifs? The deepest fears surrounding death often manifest as unresolved relationships. We fear leaving things unfinished, apologies unsaid, truths left untold, opportunities never taken simply because they seemed too difficult or too inconvenient at the time. These emotional debts weigh us down more heavily than any physical uncertainty. Consider the difference between genuine preparation and debilitating panic. Panic is when we run from the inevitability, building elaborate defenses against a natural process. It is an outburst of terror that focuses on loss. Preparation, however, is a gentle, steady inventory. It requires the courage to look honestly at our own life, at the mosaic of choices made, relationships valued, and emotional shortcomings endured. This internal review is not meant to be judgmental. It is purely analytical. We must become diligent historians of our own souls. What core conflicts remain unresolved? Where have we retreated into comfort rather than confronting uncomfortable truths? Perhaps it was a struggle with a sibling, a misunderstanding with a lover, or even a failure to forgive ourselves for past errors. These are the loose ends that snag the tapestry of a well-lived life. The key here is reconciliation. It is the art of saying goodbyes, not just dramatically on the day, but repeatedly and lovingly throughout our days. We must cultivate the habit of making those amends while we still have the time. To acknowledge another person's inherent worth, to validate their perspective even when it challenges our own, is an act of monumental grace. These small acts chip away at the foundation of regret. We often wait for a grand epiphany moment, a dramatic setting sun, or a deep crisis, to finally speak the words that matter. We tell ourselves, I will say this later. But waiting is perhaps the most profound form of postponement. Delaying vulnerability until the moment of finality means that our deepest connections are defined by their unfulfilled potential. It leaves us with the agonizing knowledge we never truly articulated how much they meant. The philosophical work here teaches us to embrace radical honesty with ourselves and with others. This involves accepting that not every relationship can be perfectly mended or fully understood before time runs out. Sometimes the lesson is simply recognizing love in its imperfect form, in the shared silence, in the practiced patience, in the mundane consistency of presence. Furthermore, preparation must also involve learning to forgive, and this begins with self-forgiveness. We are complex beings, marked by contradictions and mistakes. The accumulated weight of our own failings can become a terrible cage. To achieve inner peace, we must move beyond the relentless pursuit of perfection. True preparation means accepting that we were flawed humans living in an imperfect world, and that is enough. It frees us from the crushing burden of self-judgment. If panicking makes us feel momentarily safe by giving our fear a concrete enemy, the thing we do not know, preparation grounds us in peace by teaching us to welcome the mystery itself. Panic fights time, preparation accepts it. Panic obsesses over what is lost, preparation celebrates what has been gathered. The practice, therefore, becomes a disciplined attention to emotional presence. Every conversation, every passing moment with loved ones should be treated as if it were utterly irreplaceable. We must shed the assumption of permanence from all things, people, circumstances, feelings. This radical non-attachment makes us intensely present, and this intensified presence is its own profound form of preparation. It transforms death from a single, terrifying boundary event into a natural culmination, a chapter closing to make space for what comes next. We are not merely preparing to end. We are preparing to live with the full weight and brilliance of knowing that time has an expiry date. This knowledge is not punitive. It is exquisitely liberating. It allows us to move through the day lighter, more connected and wonderfully, urgently alive. We have traveled with the weight of knowing. We began by confronting that vast, silent unknown, the curtain beyond our sight. We learned to resist the urge to rush through life, to fill every moment with unnecessary activity, simply because pausing felt like a precursor to panic. We recognized that resistance, whether to time itself or to unavoidable change, is where most of our suffering resides. The ancient philosophers taught us that true strength lies not in avoiding difficulty, but in accepting it, in recognizing what we can actually control, the steady beat of our own judgment and intention. This acceptance meant living with a kind of fierce honesty, the understanding that life's greatest gift might just be its limits. We grappled with the necessity of change, from the fading leaves to the passing seasons. We learned that profound connections require vulnerability. They demand us to say goodbye when it is hardest. And we encountered the powerful truth embedded in remembering our own mortality, the memento mori. This remembrance was not meant to paralyze us with dread, but to give everything meaning. To see life through the lens of its finitude is to realize that nothing truly trivial can withstand such focused attention. Time becomes a finite resource, and suddenly, every shared smile, every quiet sunrise, gains an unmistakable and irreplaceable weight. This intensity of focus leads us naturally to confront what we call fear. We have learned that much of our deepest dread is not rooted in verifiable threat, but in the seductive architecture of pure imagination. It is a logical trap, where what if becomes more powerful than any observable fact. The mind loves narrative. It thrives on creating worst-case scenarios, and it often mistakes vivid fiction for impending reality. This understanding shifts our attention away from the distant end and brings it sharply, irrevocably, back to here, to this precise intersection of breath and awareness. This chapter is about the radical gift of simply being present. When we spend so much emotional energy gazing into a potential future, anticipating failures, dreading endings, or striving desperately toward an imagined perfect tomorrow, we rob ourselves of the only thing that has ever actually existed, this moment. The future is merely a projection built from memory and hope, and the past is simply what has already been swept away by time's river. Both are shadows on the cave wall. The present moment, however, is singular. It is not an arrow moving between 2 points. It is the only ground we possess. Here, in this breath, there is no lingering regret of yesterday, and no paralyzing anxiety for tomorrow. There is simply awareness. Think of those sensory anchors, the particular scent of rain hitting dry earth, the sudden warmth of sunlight on bare skin, the quiet texture of linen against the cheek. These simple inputs are the true substance of existence. The challenge presented by philosophy has always been this redirection. How do we stop living with our minds in 2 places at once? How do we bring back our scattered attention to the pure, undeniable reality of now? It requires a kind of radical stillness. Not the emptiness one imagines when sleep takes over, but an active presence, a deep engagement with what is unfolding right here, right now. When we anchor ourselves in this perfect instant, the enormous shadows of death and uncertainty begin to recede slightly. They do not vanish, for they are fundamental to our condition. But their power changes. They move from being the central focus of our fear to becoming merely another element of the current reality. We realize that if we choose to dwell in the quality of this single moment, the taste of coffee, the sound of distant laughter, the cool weight of silence, we are not ignoring the inevitable passage of time. Rather, we are maximizing the utility of it. We are ensuring that the profound beauty contained within our finite experience is experienced with its full and overwhelming grace. This presence is not a passive state. It demands continuous vigilance and emotional labor. Every moment must be seen as worthy of attention. If we fail to recognize this gift, if we allow habit or distraction to pull us back toward the anxieties of what was or what will be, we lose the purest form of living. To live in the now is to acknowledge that the greatest miracle is not what comes after, but the breathtaking perfection unfolding within the span between one breath and the next. It is a homecoming to self, a profound acceptance of the beautiful ambiguity that life inherently holds. We have spent much time looking inward. We examined the boundaries of our own lives, the fear of forgetting, the necessity of accepting what we cannot control. We learned that living in the present is not merely a suggestion. It is an act of radical philosophical resistance against the tyranny of anxiety. But contemplation is often solitary work. It keeps us focused on the internal geography of the self, how to forgive ourselves, how to find stillness within the storm. Yet, life is inherently communal. Our journey through death and meaning does not end at our own threshold. What happens next? We must look beyond the confines of our individual consciousness. When we consider what follows our breath, our focus shifts entirely from the self to the circle, the web of relationships that define us. How deeply connected are we to those who remain? This final chapter invites us to address a profound and often unspoken question. When the inevitable passing comes for us, what remains of us? It is easy, in the face of such magnitude, to fall into solipsism, believing that our demise is an event only concerning us. But humanity fundamentally resists such isolation. We are defined by our echoes. We are made up of stories shared with others. The fear of personal annihilation often intertwines with the anxiety of memory and legacy. We worry not just about dying, but about being forgotten. This fear touches on a core human desire, to leave an impact, to have mattered. Philosophically, this struggle forces us to redefine what existence truly means. Is existence merely biological continuity, or is it relational? The wisest traditions suggest that the enduring nature of a person lies not in their physical shell, but in the cumulative quality of their connections, the kindnesses shown, the truth spoken, and the unconditional love freely given. This brings us to the complex terrain of remembrance. We often romanticize the idea of a perfect monument or an illustrious reputation built upon achievement. While external honors have a place, we must ask if true enduring meaning can be etched in stone, or only within the living hearts of others. A medal fades. A remembered moment, imbued with shared empathy, continues to resonate. Therefore, our preparation for mortality cannot solely be inward, addressing the self. It must also be outward, concerning how we weave ourselves into the tapestry of lives that will continue after us. The truly prepared spirit understands that its legacy is not an object, but a pattern of emotional resonance, a continued vibration of connection. The challenge then becomes intensely practical. How do we act in our final chapters to ensure our essence continues? It requires moving past the superficial maintenance of image and embracing radical relational honesty. We must address those silences that accumulate between people, the goodbyes postponed, the apologies never spoken, the gratitude left unvoiced. These accumulated gaps are far more potent sources of grief than any physical departure itself. To minimize the void we leave behind, we must actively work to eliminate these emotional debts, while we still possess the gift of speech and shared time. This is where the deepest philosophical insight lies, that true peace with death is achieved through connection, not isolation. When we feel certain about our bond with a community, or secure in the knowledge of love received and given freely, the monumental weight of our own end becomes bearable. Our relationship with others after us fundamentally changes our relationship with ourselves. We are never fully contained within our bodies. Parts of us, our laughter, our wisdom, our compassion, are shared and absorbed into the lives we touch. The impact we seek is therefore not grand or epochal. It is minute, insistent, and rooted in vulnerability. It is teaching a single truth to one person when they are most lost. It is simply listening without attempting to fix or judge. It is bearing witness to another's fragile humanity. These acts are the threads that weave together the durable fabric of human connection, far more resilient than any marble statue. They embody the continuing life force of love and empathy. Embracing this view means cultivating a constant vigilance for relational integrity. We must live as if every conversation is an investment in our shared future. Every silence could be misunderstood, and every overlooked small act of kindness is a gift with delayed return. We are called to become skilled practitioners of the immediate relationship, to see the person before us not merely as company, but as co-architects of meaning. The quality of life measured by how much love it distributes, rather than how many material achievements it gathers. The final chapter of our philosophical journey thus points away from meditating on a transcendent endpoint and back into the immediate richness of earthly engagement. Our greatest act of preparation for death is simply to live so fully that the continuation of meaning seems effortless, a natural outflow of deep, committed connection. The best legacy we can leave is not a name etched in history books, but a palpable feeling of being truly seen, understood, and loved, extending far beyond the final curtain call. Let us therefore dedicate ourselves to the art of relational presence, understanding that our fullest life is lived not just for ourselves, but within the circle of shared human breath. We have spent time considering the limits of our lives. We have examined the fear of loss, the inevitable passage of moments and memories. But perhaps we have been looking at this struggle through the lens of perfection. We assume that to conquer death, or even its memory, we must first achieve some kind of flawless existence. We think freedom means eliminating vulnerability entirely. But philosophy shows us a profound truth. True strength is not found in pretending we are untouched by time, nor is it achieved by claiming perfection. It resides instead in the quiet and radical courage to admit our messiness, to stand before life and death with our faults exposed. The fear of death often thrives on this illusion of flawless control. We build emotional walls around ourselves, hoping that if we only appear strong enough, or beautiful enough, or successful enough, that nothing truly bad can happen. We treat vulnerability as a weakness to be hidden, an imperfection to be masked by endless busyness or careful pretense. But the deepest wisdom suggests the opposite, that our moments of greatest connection and deepest self-understanding occur precisely when we drop the facade. When we admit simply that we are fallible creatures, subject to error, pain, and change. This admission is not a surrender, it is a liberation. It is the moment we stop fighting ourselves and start acknowledging the sheer beautiful complexity of being human. Our emotions, our struggles, our mistakes, these are not blemishes on the canvas of a perfect life. They are the rich pigments that give the art its depth. When we allow ourselves to feel unpolished, when we accept our frailty in front of others, something profound shifts within us. We model for others what genuine existence looks like. Messy, unpredictable, yet infinitely valuable. This is the core realization. Connection does not require perfection, it requires presence. The fear that grips us regarding death often disguises a deeper panic about being rejected in our unperfect state. It makes us hoard moments, fearing that if we show our real selves, the doubts, the anxieties, the tired heart, that others will abandon us when we are most needed. Yet, true intimacy bypasses performance. It finds its footing on uneven ground. It is built upon the shared understanding of mutual imperfection. Consider how much energy we expend trying to curate an image for the world, an image that suggests stability, unshakable happiness, a life free from conflict or doubt. This constant performance is exhausting and profoundly isolating. We are never truly seen, and because nobody feels genuinely seen, we carry the fear with us always, the fear of being found lacking when it matters most. The ancient philosophers saw this trap clearly. They understood that to live only for an idealized future self, a version that will one day be safe from death or sadness, is to miss the reality happening right now. Vulnerability forces us back into the present. If we acknowledge our limitations, the limits of our knowledge, the limits of our strength, the ultimate limit of time itself, we cease projecting those limiting beliefs onto our relationships and our future. We begin simply accepting that being alive means accepting this inherent mix of power and precarity. It is a thrilling burden, yet one that carries an immense weight. But within that weight lies profound freedom. The courage required here is not the physical bravery of facing danger. It is the emotional daring to be real. It is the radical act of saying, I do not have all the answers. I am unsure of tomorrow. And yet, right now, with this exact breath and these imperfect hands, I choose connection. This acceptance of our shared fragility allows us to dismantle the myth that strength must be flawless. Instead, we learn that profound resilience is built from acknowledging every crack in the foundation. It begins when we stop viewing our flaws as evidence of failure and start seeing them as defining features of our humanity. We are not meant to be statues. We are meant to be flowing rivers, always changing, occasionally bumping against rocks, sometimes slowing down, sometimes rushing fast, but always moving forward through the sheer act of existing. This journey towards vulnerability is perhaps the most challenging form of wisdom. It demands that we become comfortable with being seen in our shadows, to accept that there will be moments of profound uncertainty, and to trust that those uncertainties do not negate our worth or diminish the love offered to us. Because at the end of the day, when all grand performances fade and pretense dissolves, what remains is simple honesty. It is the shared glance between two people who see each other wholly. The brilliant lights, yes, but also the tired edges, the hidden fears, and the unexamined wounds. This deep, raw acceptance becomes our most powerful defiance against the cold inevitability of death. Death reminds us that we are fragile containers of consciousness, passing through a brief moment of extraordinary beauty. But vulnerability teaches us how to carry those containers gently, how to hold them openly, knowing they might shatter, but accepting the preciousness of every single drop until the final curtain falls. We have spent this time tracing the edges of our fear. We looked at time as a dwindling resource and death as an overwhelming void. But perhaps we have been viewing the journey only from the perspective of loss, the thing that is taken away. Consider instead the concept of the circle. Life has always been seen linearly, beginning here, ending there. But in nature, nothing truly ends, it transforms. The oak leaf does not disappear when autumn arrives. It returns its nutrients to the earth, nourishing the roots for the next spring. The great forest fire consumes, yes, but from the ashes, new life insists on rising. This is the deepest truth we must confront, that nothing truly ends. It only changes form. Death, viewed through this lens, is not a cessation of existence, but merely a return to source, a necessary seed for renewal. The end point is simply the beginning of something else, somewhere else. We have spent so much mental energy fighting the inevitability of that final separation. We build walls against the transition, erecting elaborate psychological defenses to pretend that our current moment can stand forever separate from all change. This resistance causes us immense anguish. It makes the natural process seem like a catastrophic failure instead of a gentle cycle. The wisdom of the ancients teaches us to see this great cosmic loop not with dread, but with recognition, the profound understanding that separation is simply part of belonging. To live is inherently cyclical. We are born from an opening and we return to one. This pattern is not something violent or sudden. It is a predictable rhythm, as reliable as the turning of the tide. The difficulty lies in our emotional inability to accept non-linear existence. Our culture demands definitive endpoints for everything. Projects finish with a launch party, relationships end with a dramatic goodbye, and even philosophical ideas demand clear bookends. We struggle greatly with ambiguity. The idea that something can simply dissolve back into the unknown, not as nothingness, but as potential, is profoundly unsettling to the structured mind. We must recalibrate our understanding of being. To be human is to participate in this flow. It means accepting that holding onto yesterday's perfect memory or gripping today's fleeting joy does not secure permanence. Instead, it only guarantees struggle against the current of time itself. The fear we carry about death is often misdirected energy. It is less a rational fear of non-existence and more an attachment to our limited, defined selves. We are afraid not of ceasing to exist, but of dissolving the identity we have meticulously built. The name, the career, the role. The self feels too solid, too precious to simply fade away. The true act of philosophical maturity is therefore a radical emptying. It is realizing that when we look at ourselves, we are not just made of flesh and bone. We are patterns of energy passing through time. We have impacted our small corners of the world by giving love, by sharing wisdom, by being present in the messy reality of others' lives. That impact does not vanish with a final breath. It continues to ripple outward, feeding the cycle for those who follow. Embracing this circular view gives us an unparalleled kind of freedom. If endings are merely seeds for beginnings, then every ending becomes imbued with immense potential. Nothing is ever truly wasted. The exhaustion of life's journey provides the rest needed for a new germination. The deathbed itself can be viewed not as a final grave, but perhaps as the richest soil, a fertile ground returning its elements to enrich what comes next. So we must reframe our grief. We stop viewing loss as an abrupt severing and start seeing it as a deep absorption back into the source. The separation is necessary for all things to bloom again. The quiet acceptance of this truth liberates us from the desperate need for control. If change, transformation, and return are fundamental laws governing every single thing, the seasons, the tide, our own breath, then there is a natural belonging to being finite. We belong to the pattern. Our struggles are not against an insurmountable void. They are part of the necessary tension that drives growth. The final wisdom derived from this journey is one of profound trust. To trust the circle itself, trusting that what has fed us will nourish others, and that our unique patterns of love and meaning will continue their ripple long after we have become mere memories. Our existence is a loop, an echo, and part of the continuous, life-giving breath of reality. We have journeyed through the deepest concerns of being. We have stared into the sands of time and confronted the cold necessity of change. We learned that resistance, whether to a moment passing or to an undeniable truth, is the root of all suffering. We discovered that true strength does not lie in building walls against fate, but in accepting the fluidity of existence itself. The difficult task has been learning to honor what is already here, the gift of this breath, the warmth of this light, the complexity of the present moment. But there remains a final boundary we must cross, the weight of potential regret. A life lived well, it seems, is not measured by its grand achievements or its accumulated possessions. It is measured instead by the space between what was and what could have been. We often find our minds dwelling in the fragile lands of if only. If only I had taken that risk. If only I had said those difficult words. If only circumstances had unfolded differently. These are ghosts, aren't they? Elaborate specters constructed from unlived timelines. They pull us backward, anchors chaining us to possibilities that never were, or regrets we cannot rewind. The power of the if only is subtle but immense. It drains our energy, focusing all our attention on yesterday's failings or tomorrow's fears, leaving nothing for this very second. To live without the ghost of if only is not a feat of forgetting. It is an act of supreme refocusing. It means accepting that while we cannot change what was, the laughter lost, the opportunities missed, the chances unseized, we possess radical power over how we choose to inhabit this continuing now. This acceptance does not diminish sorrow. Rather, it directs our accumulated wisdom toward action. It transforms lamentation into learning. The deepest lesson of this journey is one of profound internal resource management. The human mind has a terrifying capacity for self-recrimination. We spend years auditing our past conversations for the perfect phrasing, weighing every glance and silence as if they determined our ultimate worth. But time itself moves forward relentlessly, indifferent to our perfect scorecards of regret. To finally release the burden of if only, we must understand that possibility is a river, not a fixed point. We can look upstream at past choices and acknowledge their water flow, the necessary path they carved out, but we cannot step back into those old currents to change where they went. All energy spent on imagining an alternate reality is energy stolen from the richness of this current moment. The discipline, therefore, becomes a gentle, radical kindness toward oneself and others alike. It means pausing when the familiar ache of regret rises, naming that feeling, this longing for a life unlived or words unsung, and then simply observing it without judgment, recognizing it for what it is, a beautiful but paralyzing illusion. This freedom from retrospective haunting allows us to finally see the world with clear eyes. We begin to appreciate the simple geometry of existence, the curve of a branch, the sudden scent of rain on warm dust, the uncomplicated kindness in a stranger's passing gesture. These moments, once obscured by the fog of self-blame or perceived failure, become breathtakingly vivid. We realize that true maturity is not defined by never falling, nor by avoiding regret. It is defined by the willingness to fully inhabit the reality we find ourselves in, flaws and all, accepting the imperfect masterpiece that passing time has already painted around us. The past belongs to memory. It offers lessons, but demands no more action. The future remains unknown. We must trust its uncertainty rather than building anxious castles of what might be. The gift of this quiet vigilance is the realization that our most precious remaining currency is simply attention. Attention paid fully, deeply, and intentionally to the now. It is a commitment to presence, a refusal to let the specter of if only steal the texture of today. To live without if only is thus to become an expert in arrival, arriving completely at every conversation, every vista, every necessary difficult choice. It means embracing the messy totality of being human. It means accepting that mistakes were not merely lessons, but acts of vital learning themselves. We forgive the younger selves who stumbled, and we honor the older selves who struggled. And as the day unfolds before us, unscripted and imperfect, we move forward fueled not by what might have been, but by the sheer, undiluted gravity of this precious, fragile life continuing right here. This continuous movement, accepting loss while embracing potential, is the purest form of freedom there is. We began by confronting the unsettling questions that linger at the edge of our knowing. We looked into the deep mystery of what comes after, and found ourselves trapped not just by the unknown, but by our very human need for certainty itself. That initial fear we explored, the anxiety of the void, the dread of non-knowing, it was a reflection of how much of our lives we spend trying to build walls around ambiguity. Throughout these chapters, we have journeyed from external anchors of time and circumstance, moving inward always. We learned that resisting what is simply part of nature's inevitable cycle only causes us pain. Acceptance is not resignation, but a profound alignment with reality as it unfolds. We recognize that much of our suffering came from the emotional inertia, the constant postponement of necessary truths and difficult conversations. It was easier to wait until later rather than risk vulnerability in the immediate now. We learned to shift our gaze inward, establishing the mind as our inner citadel. Here, within this self-made sanctuary, we found the power to intercept fear before it became a dominant narrative. We began asking, is this panic based on verifiable fact, or is it merely a spectacular story constructed from worry? By questioning the premise of fear itself, we saw that many deepest anxieties were logical traps, built entirely of what might be, and never was. The profound revelation concerning finitude followed. It struck us with undeniable clarity that because life has an edge, a clear boundary marked by death, this limited duration imbues every single moment with irreplaceable value. If time stretched out infinitely, would any sunrise truly matter? Scarcity gives meaning. Death does not negate life. It defines its brilliance. The ancient practice of memento mori taught us to face the inevitable limit head-on. Yet, paradoxically, this confrontation was not a call to despair, but a powerful impetus toward radical presence. Remembering that we must eventually depart freed us from the paralyzing weight of indecision and emotional regret. It became an urgent catalyst for making peace, completing connections, and living with ferocious intentionality. This process required painful self-honesty, the distinction between healthy preparation and debilitating panic. True preparation is not a stockpiling of answers. It is the tireless work of reconciliation. It means looking back at our relationships and ourselves, admitting where we held grudges or where we left love unsaid. It requires the courage to forgive others. Yes, but more deeply, it requires self-forgiveness for the times we failed to be fully present. The ultimate convergence point was the now moment. We spent chapters acknowledging how easily our minds slip into the regret of what has passed or the frantic construction of a fearful future. This constant time travel, backwards and forwards, robs us of the only true reality. This breath, this sense, this singular instant we are inhabiting right now. Radical presence demanded anchoring ourselves to the sensory world, the warmth on the skin, the scent in the air, the taste of simple sustenance. These anchor points diminish fear's power over uncertainty because they force our attention into a location where worry cannot exist. And then, our view expanded beyond just self-survival. We realized that meaning and legacy are not carved onto stone tablets. They are woven into the fabric of shared connection. Our true essence continues through the depth of love, compassion, and shared honesty we give to others in life's final chapters. This ability to connect, to impact another human soul with kindness, is the profound counterpoint to individual mortality. The journey then led us to a revolutionary acceptance, accepting imperfection itself. Fear thrives on pretense, on the desperate attempt to present an immaculate self that remains untouched by struggle or weakness. We found freedom not in achieving flawlessness, but in cultivating radical vulnerability, the strength required simply to be genuine before another human being. Resilience, we discovered, is merely the capacity to acknowledge one's own messy limitations and continue anyway. This understanding of limitation propelled us into our final philosophical reframing. That death is not an end point, but a necessary transformation. It is the radical emptying required for renewal, mirroring every natural cycle. The seed must return to the earth before new life can sprout. Resistance to this cosmic loop only breeds profound anguish. The accumulated weight of these concepts, of acceptance, vulnerability, and the beauty of finitude, brings us back to that quiet threshold we started at. The fear is not gone. It remains a subtle whisper in the corner of the mind, a faint echo of the ungraspable mystery. But it no longer possesses its old power. We have learned that life's beauty, its profound intensity and necessary urgency, exists precisely because it has a beginning and a defined end. This knowledge does not mandate despair. Instead, it bestows upon us an extraordinary kind of calm acceptance. It is the deep, quiet realization that to live fully,